Hey guys, welcome back to another chess video. Usually in these videos, I talk about tactics, ideas, and strategies that allow you to gain an advantage over your opponent, or use an advantage you already have to win the game. This is good for when you and your opponent are equal, or if you have a better position. But what about when you are the one at a disadvantage? Well, in this case, we have to think a little bit differently in order to gain back the advantage. I've got 3 ideas to talk about today, so let's dive right into it. Also, if you couldn't tell from the intro, I'm sick right now, so sorry about the audio quality on this one. Anyhow, let's get into the video. The first situation we'll talk about today is when you are down in material. When we're at a material disadvantage, the biggest issue is that our opponent has more resources that they can use to attack us than we have resources to attack them or defend ourselves. In this situation, there's 2 main ideas to keep in mind. First, we don't want to trade material. Here's why. Let's make up a position where both sides have 8 queens and black has an extra knight. The 8 queens that each side has are both worth 72 points, whereas black's extra knight is only worth 3 points. In this situation, the extra knight that black has a hard time contributing to black's overall strength because the rest of black's pieces are already worth so much. Now let's imagine another position, where both sides have only a single rook and black keeps the extra knight. Now, since each side only has 5 points from the rook, if we exclude the knight on black's side, the weight the knight has in the situation is higher than before, and the percentage of black's strength that comes from the knight is a lot more meaningful. From these 2 situations, we can see that, generally, the fewer pieces that are on the board, the more powerful each individual piece is. So by keeping as many pieces on the board as possible, we can try to minimize a material disadvantage. The second idea we should be thinking about when we're down material is looking for attacks. Being down material is only bad if your opponent is actually using more pieces than you are. If your opponent is up a whole queen, but it spends the entire game sitting in a corner, it's almost as if you were never actually down any material at all. We can apply this idea when we're down material by creating an attack that excludes black's pieces. If black has extra pieces but can't use them as defenders, it's as if they were never up in material. Remember in the last video when we talked about how in order to safely trade material, you need a greater number of attackers than your opponent has defenders? Well, this is the same concept. If we create an attack where we have more attackers than black has defenders, we'll gain some sort of advantage. And the only thing that matters here is the number of attackers versus defenders, not the number of pieces each side has in total. Another disadvantage that you might run into in your games is not having space. I've mentioned space before, but I don't think I've gone in depth into space yet, so here's a quick explanation for it. In chess, space simply means how much of the board your pieces can safely move around in. When you have a lot of space, that means your pieces can move around a lot of the board without the risk of being captured or attacked, and the opposite is true when you have little space. Space is important because it allows you to move your pieces around freely to form strong attacks, and gives your king more room to escape when it is under attack. Usually, we gain space by pushing any of our pieces, but space is usually maintained through our pawns, since pawns can set up in a line and not have to worry as much about being moved or captured as the rest of the pieces. Now, the way chess works, if you don't have space, your opponent has space, and can use it against you. Therefore, we want to get out of a spatial disadvantage as fast as possible before our opponent can use it against us. While there are many ways to make our opponents have less space, none are more simple and effective than the pawn break. Pawn breaks occur when there is a chain of pawns on the board, like in this position, and one pawn challenges some point in the chain so that there's eventually a trade and the chain is broken. In this position, the pawn break occurs when white plays pawn to b5, because after black captures back with their pawn, the c5 pawn is able to move forward and take space. In this position, there's another pawn break with pawn to g3. If black doesn't capture, then we will capture on f4, black will capture back on f4, and the g file will become an open file, which provides some more space for us. If black does capture on g3, then we'll capture back with h captures c3, and next turn we can play pawn to f4 and try to open the position up even further by offering a trade with black's g pawn. When it comes to taking space, pawns are the unparalleled masters. So the pawn break can usually be applied in most situations, provided you and your opponent actually have pawns. The last disadvantage we'll talk about in this video is when your opponent is winning on one side of the board. In chess, you can usually only attack one side of the board at a time, focusing your attack on the king side or queen side part of the board. This means that if we are losing on one side of the board, maybe our opponent got a material advantage or just has an attack that's too strong to defend against, we can use a counterattack. If our opponent has a strong attack on one side of the board, that means they've committed several pieces to the attack, which are pieces that might not be able to attack and defend at the same time. Therefore, if you spot a counterattack early enough, you might be able to avoid losing the battle on one side of the board by simply ignoring it and focusing on the other side. If the attack that you manage to create is stronger than the attack that your opponent has on the other side of the board, your opponent will have to pull pieces back to defend, and you can use that opportunity to strengthen your defense, or go all in on the attack while your opponent scrambles to shift their strategy and defend. Alright guys, that's it for today's video. I didn't have any place to put puzzles in this one because of the topic of the video, but as always, remember to look for these ideas whenever you can in your games so you can get some practice in. Anyhow, that's all I have time for, and I'll see you in the next video.